The stage driver flung the girl's valise into the mud like it had offended him, and when she caught it before it split open, half the town stepped back as if dignity might be catching too. Dust hung in the late light. The mules stamped. Somebody laughed from the boardwalk and cut himself short when she lifted her chin. She could not have been more than 22. Travel had put a gray film over her hem and a hard line in the set of her shoulders, but there was nothing worn out in her. She stood with both boots planted in the street, one hand on the valise handle, the other curled around a folded letter gone soft at the edges from being opened too many times. When the hotel keeper's wife pointed toward the east road and said, "Not here," the girl looked past her to the graveyard on the hill and answered, quiet as a blade being drawn, "My father's buried in your ground. I did not come all this way to let strangers keep him." Before we go any further, settle in wherever this story finds you tonight, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We always like knowing who's sitting by the fire with us. Now listen close, because towns can tell you what they are in a single evening, and Red Bluff told the truth before the dust even settled. Sheriff Deacon Pike came down off the boardwalk with the slow, easy walk of a man who had forgotten the sound of being denied. He was broad through the middle, with a silver star polished bright and a habit of worrying the corner of his mustache every time he meant to lie. He stopped a few feet from the girl and let his gaze move over her face, her dark braid, the old turquoise bead tied at her throat. "You got Apache blood," he said. "I have my mother's," she answered. That enough. The town listened for what would happen next. Red Bluff had the dry, hollow stillness of a place that had learned to live by one man's permission. Even the sign above the mercantile creaked softly, like it was afraid to make a full complaint. On the hitch rail outside the saloon, a chestnut gelding lifted his head. So did the man holding the reins. He had been halfway through tying off his bedroll when the valise hit the mud, and now he stood with the rope loose in his hand, looking not at the girl's face, but at the sheriff's boots planted in her way. He was long through the legs, sun-browned, and plain enough that you might miss him in a crowd until he moved. Quiet men are like that. The world mistakes their stillness for emptiness until the wrong moment. His name was Eli Barrett. The girl held out the folded paper. "Thomas Vale sent for me before he died." Sheriff Pike did not touch it. "Thomas Vale died owing money to Silas Rourke. Ranch is settled. Then you can read the letter and say that looking at me." That put a faint crease between the sheriff's eyes. He knew the name on the page mattered. So did everyone else. Thomas Vale had owned Willow Draw, the narrow green cut of land north of town where the best spring in 20 miles ran cold even in August. He had also spent 20 years pretending the world had not seen him looking twice at an Apache woman by the wash one spring morning. Towns remember sins they approve of differently than sins they don't. Pike reached for the letter. Before his fingers got there, Eli Barrett stepped off the curb. "Let her hold her own paper," he said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. A few heads turned his way. Eli had drifted in and out of Red Bluff for years, taking winter work where he could, breaking colts, driving cattle, fixing what needed fixing. Men hired him because he did not drink their wages away and did not talk over his supper. Women trusted him with frightened horses and frightened children. Silas Rourke disliked him for reasons quiet men often inspire in louder ones. Sheriff Pike looked at him. "This ain't yours." "No," Eli said, "but it also ain't a one-man show." The girl gave him a quick, sharp glance, not grateful, not yet trusting, only measuring. Good for her. Trust given cheap is usually paid for twice. Pike finally took the letter and broke the seal. The crowd leaned in without moving. He read it once, then again slower. His jaw hardened. "Says Vale acknowledges her as his daughter. Says the deed to Willow Draw passes to Mara Vale by right." Murmurs went through the street like dry grass taking fire. The girl had a name now. Mara Vale. Somehow that made them like her less. Old Mrs. Belle from the boarding house drew her shawl tighter and muttered, "Lord help us." From the mercantile doorway, Emmett Voss kept rubbing the same clean patch of counter with a yellow rag he no longer seemed aware he held. Sheriff Pike folded the letter small. "Probate ain't just paper. Rourke's lien stands till Judge Mercer says different." "Then I'll speak to the judge," Mara said. "Judge is in Tucson." "Then I'll wait." "You won't wait in town." A little boy by the water trough was staring round-eyed at Mara's bead necklace. His mother pulled him back so quickly his heel scraped wood. Mara's face did not change. Only her hand tightened once on the valise handle. "You turned my mother away from your doctor when I was 10, she said. "I remember this street." That landed harder than a slap. Eli felt it in his ribs. Pike's mustache twitched under his fingers. "You remember wrong." "No," Mara said. "I remember exactly." Eli looked at her, then the way a man looks at a match struck in a dark barn. He had been 19 that summer. He remembered a woman burning with fever in the back of a wagon. He remembered the sheriff saying no camp sickness came into town. He remembered a little girl holding a cup of water with both hands. He remembered doing nothing. Tom had not dulled that memory. It had sharpened it. Silas Rourke appeared just then, as men like him always do when cruelty has been warmed for them in advance. He came out of the bank in a black coat too fine for the heat, hat brim clean, boots that never saw honest mud unless another man carried it in. He smiled before he reached the circle, which told you the smile wasn't for kindness. It was for ownership. "Well now," he said, Tom Vale's ghost still making poor choices. Mara turned toward him with a stillness that made even Rourke's grin pause. "Did you know my father wrote to me? He wrote to every bottle in town. Wouldn't surprise me. He asked me to come home." Rourke spread his hands. "Home's a generous word. Willow Draw belongs to debt now." "To you, you mean?" "To the man who paid what your father owed." Eli saw Mara take one slow breath. There are people who show fear by shaking and people who show it by going perfectly steady. She was the second kind. "Then I'll see the books," she said. A few men on the boardwalk made soft sounds through their noses. To ask a man like Rourke for proof in public was to refuse his habit of being believed. Rourke smiled again, thinner this time. "You can see the road east come sunrise." Eli did not know he had made his choice until he heard his own voice. "She'll need a place tonight." The silence after that was so sudden you could hear the flies at the livery. Mrs. Bell looked scandalized. Sheriff Pike looked pleased in a fox-like way, as if Eli had stepped where a trap had been waiting. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Mara turned her head toward Eli. "Why?" "Because I remember a child at the town line and my horse doing nothing while her world ended. Because I have been carrying that silence around like a coffin nail for 12 years. Because this town knows how to look away and I am tired of resembling it." What he said instead was, "Because the day's near gone, and only a coward likes a woman put on the road after dark." Something unreadable moved across Mara's face. Not softness. Not yet. But something. Rourke tipped his head. "Careful, Barrett. You stand next to a blaze long enough, folks stop believing you ain't part of the fire." Eli looped his reins over the rail. "Folks blame the flame they can see. Saves them from naming who lit it." That line sat in the hot air a long second. Rourke's smile went flat. "Fine. Take her to the Old Line Shack by Miller Wash if you're set on charity. Town lots are closed to her." He turned on his heel and walked away as though permission itself had two legs and wore his boots. Pike followed him after tossing Mara's letter back to her. By the time the sun slipped behind the red hills, Eli had loaded her valise onto his horse and was leading the way north of town. Mara walked instead of riding. She did not explain. Eli did not ask. The road gave off the day's heat through the soles of their boots. Somewhere in the mesquite, a night bird started up. "You should have let me stay in the street," she said at last. "I figured you'd object if I let them feel righteous about it." "That your habit? Objecting to towns? Only the ones that earn it." She glanced at him. "You were here before." He kept his eyes on the road. "I've passed through. You were here when my mother was sick." The words came soft. The truth in them didn't. He nodded once. "Yes. And you did nothing." "No." She stopped walking. He stopped too. In the gathering dark her face looked younger for the first time, which made the hardness of it sadder. "Then don't mistake this for trust, Mr. Barrett. I wouldn't dare." She walked again. So did he. The line shack was little more than 4 walls, a roof, and a stove whose door hung crooked. But Eli had swept it once last winter between cattle drives, and there was a water barrel half full and a clean blanket rolled in oilcloth. He lit the lamp. The room filled with amber. Mara stood in the center of it without setting her valise down. "I'm not staying here to hide." "Good," Eli said. "Because Willow draws another 3 miles, and if Rourke truly believes he owns it, that's where he'll watch." That got him her full attention. "You know the place?" "I've mended fence there." "Then take me." It was near full dark. The sensible choice was dawn. The safe choice was the next stage east. Mara made neither easy for either of them. They rode under a sky gone deep blue and sharp with early stars. The trail narrowed into cottonwoods, then opened into the cut of willow draw where the land dipped and held a ribbon of green in defiance of the surrounding dust. Even in the dark, you could smell water. Cool, clean, hidden. The cabin sat crooked but standing. The corral rails leaned. The windmill squealed one slow turn in the night breeze. Beside the cabin, under a rough cedar cross, lay a mound of fresh earth. Mara slid off the horse before Eli could stop her. She crossed the yard and knelt by the grave. She did not cry. That would have been easier to watch. She touched 2 fingers to the cedar cross where Thomas Vale's name had been burned in with a hot nail, and then she pressed her forehead to her fist like she was steadying something inside herself that had begun to sway. When she rose, Eli saw that her mouth had gone bloodless. "Did anyone stand here with him?" she asked. "I don't know." She nodded once, as if a worse answer had been expected. Inside the cabin, dust had settled over everything except the table. Someone had searched recently. Drawers hung open. The mattress had been slit. Mara's gaze moved over the wreckage, sharpened, and went straight to the stone hearth. She crouched beside it, felt under the loose 3rd brick, and drew out an oilskin packet. "How'd you know?" Eli asked. "My father used to hide peppermint there when he thought I'd come visit him in secret." She said it without looking at him. He was a coward in public and generous in corners. Inside the oilskin was a deed, a folded survey map, and a ledger bound in cracked brown leather. There was also a single sheet in Thomas Vale's hand. Mara held the lamp closer and read. Eli watched the light move over her face as the words took hold. "If you are reading this, Rourke has come for the spring. He stole water from 3 families besides me and put the debts in his own books. I kept copies. There is more beneath the mill floor. I was weak when it mattered most. Do not be. If the town will not stand for you, make them stand for the truth." Mara lowered the page. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the lamp. "He knew," she said. "Knew what?" "That Rourke had my mother turned away before she died." She swallowed once. He wrote it in another letter. "Says Rourke told the doctor any man who treated her would lose his contract with the mine." Eli felt the room pull smaller around him. Mara looked up at him. "And now he's dead." A horse snorted outside. Then another. Eli blew out the lamp. The night snapped shut around them. He was already moving when the first torch hit the barn. Flame climbed dry wood with a hungry crack. Horses in the corral screamed. Mara was past him before he caught her arm. "Not the ledger," she hissed. "The mare." He let go. They ran opposite directions, because some people reach for money when fire comes, and some reach for breathing things. Mara hit the corral gate at a dead run, spoke once low in Apache, and the gray mare at the far end stopped slamming herself against the rails long enough for Mara to cut her free. Eli had the gelding and pack horse out when a shot tore splinters from the post beside his head. "Barrett," a voice called from the dark. "Man's got poor taste in company. Rourke's riders. 3 at least. Maybe 4. Eli shoved the horses toward the creek bed. Mara came through smoke leading the gray, the ledger strapped beneath her shirt. The barn roof groaned. Firelight threw giant shadows over the yard, and in one bright, violent instant Eli saw Mara turn back toward the grave. "No," he snapped. "My father. He's beyond fire." She held his gaze one raw second, then swung up bareback onto the gray mare. They rode out through the cottonwoods with bullets chopping leaves around them and the whole sky behind them going orange. That was the moment her world broke for good. Behind her burned the last quiet place where she might have mourned and left. Ahead of her lay the town that had denied her, the truth that could ruin a powerful man, and a choice no road east would spare her from. By morning, Red Bluff knew the barn at Willow Draw had burned. By noon, the story was that the Apache girl had tried to torch the whole property for spite. Towns are quickest with lies that flatter their first decision. Eli and Mara spent the dawn in a dry arroyo beneath a shelf of red rock, while smoke thinned in the distance. Mara sat with her knees drawn up, ledger in her lap, reading page after page. Eli cleaned his revolver with a strip of cloth and watched the sun lift over the ridge. 3 families, she said at last. Rourke took their water first. When their cattle died, he bought their land on debt. Then he did the same to my father. Names: Cooper, Salcedo, Finch. Eli looked up. Finch as in little Toby Finch from town. She nodded. His father signed with an X. Rourke charged him twice for the same feed, and called the difference interest. Eli swore softly. Mara shut the ledger. I could ride to Tucson with this. You could. He'd still own the sheriff by the time I got back. Maybe the judge too. Likely. She looked toward Red Bluff, where the roofs sat flat and harmless in the distance, as if they had not spat her out the day before. Then the easy thing is leave and live. And the hard thing? She stood. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt. Smoke had settled in her hair. Make them hear it. They came into town near noon by the back road. Eyes followed them from porches. Nobody called welcome. Mrs. Finch, Toby's mother, was hanging wash with hands gone chapped from lie and worry. When she saw Mara beside Eli, her face tightened the way a wound does around a thorn. Mara went straight to her. Your husband's debt was stolen. Mrs. Finch laughed once with no humor in it. Everything we had was stolen. I can prove who stole it. Mrs. Finch's clothespins paused between finger and line. Hope is a dangerous thing in poor houses. People touch it as though it might burn. Why would you help us? Mara's eyes flicked once across the town square where men still watched her like a storm front. Because thirst doesn't care who is cruel first. Mrs. Finch looked at her a long moment, then took the ledger page Mara offered and tucked it into her apron without another word. That was how it started. Not with apology, not with change of heart. Only with one woman too tired of fear to refuse a fact. By late afternoon, Mara had shown pages to old Mateo Salcedo behind the blacksmith shed, where sparks from the forge drifted bright in the dim like little souls rising. She had shown them to Noah Cooper beside the church pump, his left hand trembling so hard the paper shook. She had not begged. She had simply opened the books and let them read their own ruin in another man's handwriting. Eli watched the town rearrange itself one glance at a time. Suspicion still held strongest, but under it something meaner toward Rourke had begun to stir. Nobody likes learning their suffering had a signature. Then the crisis came in on 4 iron shoes and a scream. Toby Finch had climbed onto a bay gelding outside the mercantile while his mother bartered sugar. Somebody dropped a crate. The gelding went blind with fright and reared high, Toby hanging crooked in the saddle with one foot caught. Men shouted. Nobody reached him in time. Mara moved before Eli did. She came out of the street like she'd been shot from a bow, hands low, voice low, every step certain. The gelding struck out. She did not flinch. She spoke again, a soft rhythmic murmur that had no fear in it at all, and laid one hand on the horse's neck right where the sweat pulsed hottest. The bay shivered, came down, blew hard, stood. In 3 heartbeats, she had Toby's boot free and the child against her shoulder. The whole square stared. Toby buried his face in her neck and sobbed. Mara handed him back to his mother with a gentleness that looked older than she was. Mrs. Finch clutched the boy to her. Her mouth worked once before words found it. Thank you. Mara nodded and stepped back. From the saloon porch, Silas Rourke had been watching the whole thing with one hand resting on the post. He smiled when Toby's mother thanked Mara. He smiled the way a rattlesnake lies warm under stone. By sunset, handbills were tacked on the church door, claiming Apache raiders had been seen in the hills and warning all citizens to remain loyal to lawful authority. Sheriff Pike Road street to street repeating it. The message beneath the message was plain enough. Stand with Rourke or stand exposed. Mara and Eli ate beans from the same tin in the lean-to behind the livery because Mrs. Bell still would not let Mara through her door, though she had sent a loaf out wrapped in a clean towel. That was Red Bluff in miniature. Prejudice at the threshold, conscience sneaking around back. You know what he's doing, Eli said. He means to make me look like the danger he already promised. He'll force folks to choose before they're ready. Mara scraped the last of the beans with the spoon, then let them feel how it is to be pushed. He studied her across the dim. If a town spit you into the dust and still needed your hands to save it, would you help them or ride on? Tell me true. I think a lot of folks listening tonight know exactly how that question feels. Mara looked up from the empty tin, and for the first time the hard line around her mouth trembled. I don't know, she said. I know what they did. I also know what it costs to become the same kind of hungry they are. A bell rang once from the far end of town. Not the church. The mine bell. Eli was already on his feet. That's trouble. They reached the south well to find a knot of people gathered round, cursing and coughing. The bucket had come up foul with dead mice in it, and someone was shouting that the Apache girl had cursed the water. Mara pushed through the crowd, knelt, sniffed once, and looked toward the hill where Rourke's or wagons cut ruts down from the mine. Not a curse, she said. Lie. Rourke's foreman, a thick-necked brute named Harland with a scar like a white worm under his ear, stepped forward. Funny you know the smell so quick. Funny you'd poison a town well and pick the first enemy handy. Harland swung before Eli could move. The punch caught him high on the cheekbone and sent him into the trough. Water sloshed. Somebody screamed. Then everything broke loose. Eli hit back hard. Harland went down, came up, reached for a knife. Mara snatched the bucket hook from the well frame and cracked it across his wrist so the blade flew spinning. Sheriff Pike shoved into the ring drawing his pistol, yelling for order while choosing his target. Rourke's voice cut above them. Enough. He came through the crowd, face smooth, hat untouched, like chaos itself had sent for him. Pike, he said, disarm Barrett and the girl. These folks need protection. From who? Mara asked. The man who owns the lie? Rourke's eyes rested on her. Cold now. Done smiling. From the people who think bitterness counts as proof. Mara took one step toward him with the bucket hook still in hand. Men like you call a woman dangerous when what they mean is she won't kneel. Nobody spoke after that. You could hear the creak of the well rope in the wind. Rourke's jaw tightened. Sunrise, he said to Pike without looking away from her. Have them gone. If they're still inside town limits after that, I'll treat it as armed provocation. The crowd shifted. Some backed away from Mara. Some looked at Rourke differently than they had that morning. Mrs. Finch, holding Toby against her skirt, did not move at all. The space for quiet choices had closed. They left town in darkness with only what they could strap to 2 saddles. Mrs. Bell thrust a parcel of biscuits at Eli without meeting Mara's eyes. Mateo Salcedo pressed a small crucifix into Mara's palm and muttered, "Truth needs witnesses." Mrs. Finch said nothing, only handed Mara a coil of clean bandage as if she suspected the night ahead. Riders followed before they cleared the wash. Mara heard them first. 3, she whispered. No, 4. How can you tell? Different spacing. One horse drags its left hind. They cut north into broken country where mesquite gave way to stone. Moonlight silvered the edges of the ravine. Hoofbeats closed. A shot cracked. The gray mare leaped. Eli cursed and ducked low over his gelding's neck. Canyon narrows ahead, he called. I know. Of course she knew. This was the land people said made her savage and small and unfit for town life. In the dark it became language under her hands. They plunged into the narrows at speed. Rock walls rose on both sides. Sound snapped and doubled. Mara slid from the saddle before the mare had stopped and slapped the reins free. What are you doing? Eli hissed, making them guess. She sent both horses down separate forks, then pulled Eli into a shelf shadow barely wide enough for 2 breathing bodies. Riders thundered past seconds later, one of them peeling left after the gray, another right after the gelding, the other 2 swearing at the echo. Mara waited until the hoofbeats had faded. Now, they ran on foot over stone and thorn with only moonlight and memory to guide them. Eli was just beginning to think they might make the spring cave at the head of the draw when the shot came from above. It hit him high in the shoulder and spun him hard enough to drop him to one knee. Mara whirled. Harlan stood on the ridge with a rifle, grin pale in the dark. Rourke says bring the book, he called down. And maybe we won't bury the cowboy where coyotes can argue over him. Eli tried to rise. His arm failed. Mara stepped in front of him, knife drawn. The moon flashed once on the blade. Come down and take it, she said. Harlan started to laugh. Then a child's voice cracked the night. Mama. They both turned. Toby Finch stood on the wash edge 20 yards away, barefoot, nightshirt flapping, eyes huge with terror. One of Rourke's other men had him by the collar. Bait. They had used the child to draw Mara into the open. For one awful second the whole world balanced there. The wounded man behind her, the child ahead, the rifle above. Mara moved. She went low and fast across the wash, not toward the man holding Toby, but toward the loose shale at the base of the ridge. She kicked into it with both heels. Rock slid. Harlan lost footing. His second shot went wild. Eli, half fainting, drew left-handed and fired once. The man holding Toby dropped with a cry and let go the boy's shirt. Toby, run. Mara shouted. The child bolted toward her. Harlan came skidding down the slope with murder on his face. Mara met him halfway. He was bigger, meaner too, but he fought like a man used to frightening people into losing their shape. Mara did not lose hers. She let his weight come, twisted, drove the knife hilt into his throat. He staggered. She caught the rifle as it fell and cracked the stock across his temple. He went down hard and stayed there. Toby slammed into her waist, shaking so badly she could feel it through her skirt. Eli had gone white from blood loss. Mara looked from child to man and knew there was no longer any road through this night that did not ask everything of her. The spring cave lay another quarter-mile up the ravine. She got Toby walking with one hand, hauled Eli's good arm over her shoulders with the other, and moved. Eli bit back every sound except one when they crossed the creek, a short torn breath that told her how bad the wound was. "You can leave me," he ground out. "No. They want the ledger. Then they can want." They reached the cave just before dawn, a shallow pocket behind a curtain of hanging roots where spring water dripped cold and steady into a stone basin. Mara set Toby down in a nest of dry reeds and turned to Eli. The shirt around his shoulder was black and slick. She took out the clean bandage Mrs. Finch had given her. "This will hurt. It'd be stranger if it didn't." She cut the shirt, found the bullet crease, and worked with hands that did not shake until his blood ran over her knuckles warm as memory. Eli gripped a rock and made no sound except once, when she pressed the folded cloth hard. Toby had cried himself asleep by then, curled under Eli's coat. Dawn spread pale over the cave mouth. For the first time in hours, nothing was chasing them. The quiet felt almost holy. Mara washed her hands in the spring. Eli watched her in the thin gray light. "You remembered me," he said. "Yes. For the wagon. For standing there." He nodded as if each word had been deserved and measured long ago. "I've done a fair amount of wishing to wake up before that day and be a better man." She sat back on her heels. "Why weren't you?" The honesty of it made him close his eyes a moment. "Because I was young and wanted men like Pike and Rourke to think I belonged among them. Because I knew it was wrong and chose easy over right. Because cowardice often looks plain as dirt once you've walked off from it." He swallowed. "I have not had a decent night's sleep about it in 12 years. Mara said nothing. He looked at sleeping Toby, then at the spring dripping into stone. "If you can't forgive me, I understand. But I won't walk away again. Not from you. Not from what they did." The cave held still around them. Water, roots, breath. Mara reached up and untied the turquoise bead from her throat. The leather was old, polished by years against skin. "My mother gave me this when the fever started," she said. "Told me some things are small enough to keep and large enough to live inside." She turned the bead in her fingers. "I spent a long time thinking if I ever saw Red Bluff again, I'd burn what it loved and call us even." "What changed?" She looked toward Toby sleeping in Eli's coat, and then back to the bandage on Eli's shoulder, already seeping through. "Being left is one kind of hurt," she said softly. "Living like nobody would come if you called is another." Eli's eyes shone once and steadied. It was the first time all night he looked more wounded by mercy than by lead. She tied the bead around his wrist. He stared at it. "Mara, so you remember what not walking away costs?" For a long moment neither spoke. Outside, the sun found the upper rim of the canyon and lit the hanging roots gold. Then Eli said, low enough it almost belonged to the water, "Home ain't always where you're wanted first. Sometimes it's where somebody keeps the lamp lit till you can believe it yourself." If that line catches you somewhere tender tonight, then you know exactly why we tell these stories. And if this one is moving you, a like and a subscribe tells us to keep lighting this kind of fire. Warmth changed between them after that. Not safety. Warmth. The kind that begins in a ruined place and makes no promise except honesty. Toby woke hungry and ashamed of his tears. Mara fed him biscuit in small pieces. Eli, pale but steadier, listened while Toby confessed what mattered most. He had followed Harlan because Harlan told him his father's debt papers were being burned up at the dam office. "The dam office?" Mara said. Toby nodded fast. "Mr. Rourke keeps all the ledgers there. Pa says it's the only place in the valley he trusts more than his pocket." Mara looked at Eli. Eli looked back. The same thought took both of them. Rourke had dammed the upper wash years ago with cribbing and orerock, holding back water that should have fed Willow Draw and the lower farms. If he kept the debt books in the office there, he kept the proof beside the crime. Mara stood. "Mountain runoff will come by evening." Toby blinked. "It ain't rained." "Not here," she said. "Smell the water." Eli did. Under the cave's cool mineral scent rode another note. Fresh silt, sharp and cold from high country. Floodwater coming from storms beyond the ridge. Mara's mind moved quick now, all the scattered pieces taking their places. If he holds the gates shut to keep the reservoir high through the auction, the dam could break. And the whole south end of town drowns, Eli said. She nodded. He would risk it if he thought fear would make the farmers sign. The easy thing would have been to ride north with the boy, the ledger, and their lives. The hard thing was Red Bluff. By the time they reached the ridge above the dam, the sky over town was still bright, but black weather boiled far off in the mountains like ink in water. Below them Rourke's reservoir shone dark and overfull. Wagons and riders crowded the yard by the dam office. Farmers from Red Bluff stood in a line outside, hats in hand, waiting to sign away more years of themselves for another ration of water. Sheriff Pike watched over them. Rourke stood at the table on the porch like a preacher of bad religion. Mara took in the spillway, the gate wheel, the rotten braces on the south retaining wall. She saw where mud already trembled wet at the seams. He doesn't know the wall's soft, Eli murmured. He knows enough, Mara said. He just thinks he can outride consequences. They came down the slope in full sight of everyone. Heads turned. Murmurs broke. Pike reached for his pistol. Rourke's face hardened to stone. Told you sunrise, he said. Mara walked straight toward the porch with Toby beside her and Eli at her shoulder, pale but upright. You poisoned the well. You burned Willow Draw. You stole from every family waiting in that line. Rourke gave a small, tired smile for the benefit of the crowd. And now she brings a child to sell the tale. Toby's little fists balled at his sides. Before fear could take him, Mara spoke louder. Ask him where the Cooper debt is. Ask him where the Salcedo water note is. Ask him why the Finch land was charged twice for feed that never came. The line of farmers shifted. Noah Cooper stepped forward first, because someone always has to be first, and the brave are often the ones with least left to lose. Answer her. Rourke's smile thinned. My books are private. Not when they were written with stolen water, Mara said. A low rumble rolled down from the mountains. She turned and pointed to the reservoir. Open the gates. Rourke did not even glance. You ain't ordering me on my own property. The wall is soft. That wall stood 8 years. Open it now, she said. And for the first time something like command cracked from her voice, so clean the crowd felt it. Unless you'd rather drown the same people you've already bled. Rourke laughed. That was his mistake. Not the theft. Not the fire. Men like him survive a long while by counting on everyone else's fear. The mistake is laughing once too often in front of the people you require to stay small. The second rumble came louder. Up in the spill channel, a tongue of brown froth showed where clean water should have run. Mara moved. She ran for the gate wheel before Pike understood she had already chosen action over argument. Pike shouted. Eli drew and fired at the sheriff's boot heel, splintering porch plank and stopping him just long enough. The crowd scattered. Rourke lunged after Mara. Harland, still bruised, alive, and ugly, came off the side of the office with a rifle. Mrs. Finch stepped into his path with a shovel. You want to know when a town changes? It is not when they apologize. It is when they interrupt the man they fear. Harlan swung the rifle. Mateo Salcedo brought his hammer down on the barrel. Noah Cooper tackled Pike around the knees. Toby screamed for his mother. The whole yard exploded. Mara hit the iron wheel and hauled. It did not move. Locked. Rourke reached her then, grabbing a fistful of her braid and slamming her shoulder against the timber housing. Pain flashed white. He hissed into her ear. You should have taken the road like your mother did. Mara drove her elbow back into his ribs. He cursed and let go. She saw the key ring at his belt. Saw, too, the water trembling higher against the wall behind him. He came at her again. This time she used the thing everybody in town had looked at with judgment all their lives. Her weight, her rootedness, the low strength built by hauling and riding and surviving land that did not forgive weakness. She dropped under his reach, hooked him by the hip, and drove him into the gate housing hard enough to knock the breath out of him. The keys hit the mud. She grabbed them. Rourke lunged. Eli intercepted him shoulder first, and both men went down in the slurry by the spillway, striking savage and close. Rourke fought like ownership was a limb. Eli fought like guilt had finally found the right door to break through. Mara jammed the key in the lock. Turned. Hauled the wheel. Nothing. Again. Metal shrieked. The wheels shifted half an inch. Brown water punched through a crack under the gate. Again, Eli shouted, blood on his mouth. She braced both boots and threw her whole body into it. The wheel spun once, twice. The gate rose with a groan so deep it felt like the earth complaining. Water blasted through the spillway in a roaring wall. The south brace snapped. For one terrible instant the dam office tilted. Windows shattered. Inside, shelves of ledgers, notes, and deed boxes spilled out across the floor. Then the runoff tore through the lower wall and blew the whole front room open to daylight. Papers flew into the yard in a wild white storm. Farmers stared as their names skated through mud at their feet. Rourke saw it too. Something animal entered his face. He tore free of Eli and ran not for safety but for the office, diving after the papers like a starving man after bread. The wall behind him gave way. Mara did not think. She ran to the coil line hanging by the hoist, looped it round the post, and flung the free, and just as the floor collapsed under Rourke, the rope struck his chest. He caught it by reflex and slammed against the outer beam above the torrent. She had him. Every soul in the yard saw it. Rourke coughed water and mud, hanging there over the spill, and looked up at the woman he had spent 2 days trying to erase. "Pull me up," he choked. Mara wrapped the rope around both forearms and held. Her burned palms screamed. Below, the flood boiled past carrying splintered boards and the open mouth of his ruined office. "Why?" she asked. He stared at her like the question itself was obscene. "Because I'll die. And my mother?" Silence. "And my father?" His eyes shifted. Not shame. Calculation. Even now. He was weak. That was the last thing he should have said in front of Red Bluff. Mara did not let go. Neither did she pull him to safety alone. She looked over her shoulder at the town. "You want justice?" she said, voice rough with effort. "Then come look at what's hanging there." One by one they came. Mrs. Finch with mud to her knees. Noah Cooper clutching a soaked note with his own X on it. Mateo. Mrs. Bell. Even Sheriff Pike, pinned now beneath the weight of his neighbor's understanding. They looked down at the man who had bought their winters, buried their losses in paperwork, and called it law. Then Eli stepped beside Mara, put both hands over the rope above hers, and said to Pike, "You can arrest him breathing, or you can explain a dead banker to every farmer in the territory. Your choice." Pike saw it all at once. The papers, the witnesses, the dam, the end of borrowed loyalty. Men like him live by standing nearest power. When power changes hands, so do they. He cleared his throat. "Silas Rourke, I'm taking you into custody for fraud, arson, attempted murder, and water theft." Rourke began to curse. It turned ugly, then desperate, then useless. Together, Mara and Eli hauled him up just enough for the others to seize him. They dragged him into the mud on the very yard where he had meant to sell their lives back to them by the bucket. The rain from the high country hit half an hour later. Not on Red Bluff itself at first, but on the ridges beyond, where thunder rolled like a slow verdict. By then the gates were open. The worst of the pressure bled off, and the flood ran fierce but guided through the spill channel instead of into town. The aftermath lasted weeks, but its shape was decided that evening. Rourke's ledgers proved everything. Double charges, forged interest, false liens, threat payments to Pike. Even a note about denying Indian contagion entry in his clipped narrow hand from the summer Mara's mother died. Thomas Vale's copies matched the originals. Judge Mercer came back from Tucson under more attention than he preferred and found himself forced, by witnesses and records and a very public dam failure, to rule cleanly for once in his life. Willow Draw passed to Mara by lawful deed. The Cooper and Finch notes were voided. Mateo Salcedo got his Southfield back. Sheriff Pike lost his badge before the month turned. Harland went to Yuma in chains beside the man he had once called boss. Rourke's bank credit collapsed so fast it seemed almost indecent. The mine contract was stripped. The house on the hill sold at auction to settle claims for repairs and restitution. By winter there was nothing left of him but a name folks used when warning children what greed turns a face into. But the part the town remembered longest happened the night after the dam nearly broke. Mara stood at Thomas Vale's grave in the dark with a new cedar board under her arm. Eli came carrying a lantern. He did not crowd her, just stood close enough that the light reached both of them. "I can build the marker in the morning," he said. She shook her head. "Tonight." So they did it there by lantern glow, the smell of wet earth rising rich around them. the creek running loud with saved water down in the draw. Eli hammered. Mara held the board steady. When it was fixed in place, she knelt and set a small flat stone at the base. For your mother? Eli asked. For the part of him that failed her, Mara said. And the part that tried, too late, to tell the truth. He stood quiet beside her. After a while she said, I don't know how to begin with a town after a thing like this. You don't begin with the town. With what then? He looked toward the dark ribbon of trees along the spring. One decent thing, then another. She let that settle. Then, without looking at him, will you stay? Eli did not answer right away, which made his answer worth hearing when it came. If you mean till the fencing's up, yes. If you mean longer, I'll stay as long as staying is a thing you truly want and not a debt you're paying. Mara turned then. Lantern light moved in his eyes, in the turquoise bead still tied round his wrist, in the weariness both of them had earned. She laid her hand once against his bandaged shoulder, careful and certain. I was never looking for a man to rescue me, she said. Good, he said softly. I'd have been poor at that. A breath of laughter left her, startled, small, and real. I was looking, she said, for one who would stand still when everyone else stepped back. His hand covered hers where it rested on his shoulder. No rush, no performance, just warmth, at last meeting warmth. He kissed her forehead first, as if asking the part of her that had lived too long under whether gentleness still had a home there. When she lifted her face to him after, the kiss that followed was quiet enough for the creek to keep its own counsel. By spring, Red Bluff had learned the slower work of shame. Mrs. Bell invited Mara through the front door and cried when Mara accepted. Mrs. Finch brought over seed potatoes and stayed for coffee. Emmett Voss at the mercantile stopped rubbing the same patch of counter long enough to say Miss Vale, with something like respect in it. Children began cutting through Willow Draw on hot afternoons because Mara kept a barrel of cold spring water by the porch and never once asked whose parents had once looked away. She did not forgive cheaply. That would have made forgiveness worth too little. But neither did she build her life around injury anymore. She rebuilt the barn with Eli and Mateo. She set the old windmill right. She put the south pasture back under fence. When folks asked how she knew where to cut the new irrigation trench, she'd shrug and say the land tells on itself if you quit talking long enough to listen. That first summer after the flood, Toby Finch came running up the porch steps with 2 willow poles and a fishhook bent crooked in triumph. Mara was mending a bridle in the shade. Eli was planing a board nearby. Miss Mara, Toby said, breathing hard. Ma says I can spend the afternoon if you don't mind. Mara looked at the poles, the boy, the hope bright in his face, and then over at Eli. The turquoise bead still circled his wrist. He had left it there, never asked to return it. Maybe some promises don't need speaking more than once. Course I don't mind, she said. But if you hook my good towels on those fish, you'll answer for it. Toby grinned and tore off toward the creek. Eli leaned back in his chair, watching him go. Place gets louder every week. Land's healing, Mara said. He smiled. So are people. Late that evening, when the chores were done and the heat had finally gone out of the day, Mara stood with him by the porch rail and listened to frogs down by the water. Fireflies stitched green sparks through the reeds. The house behind them smelled of coffee, leather, and cut pine. You were right, she said. About what? She rested her head briefly against his shoulder. One decent thing, then another. He turned his hand palm up on the rail. She set hers into it like it had always known the road there. Turns out a heart comes back the same way pasture does after fire, she said. Black first, then green at the edges where you least expect it. Below them the creek moved silver through Willow Draw. The rebuilt barn stood clean and red against the darkening hills, and the porch lamp burned warm enough to be seen from the road long before a traveler reached home. Next time, stay with us for the story of a deaf seamstress sent west in disgrace to marry a widower she has never met, only to discover the quiet man waiting for her has been keeping a secret that could cost them both the only home either has left.